Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to talk about XLOOKUP. I'm going to go over what it does better than the other lookup formulas and functions you might use, but also why I never use it, not in my files, not in my templates. And so I'll show you first with what it does better than existing lookup functions. So let's say we're in this example, we're going to look up an employee ID. Let's say employee ID 1005. And I'm going to do this with XLOOKUP and also do it with VLOOKUP. And let's compare the formulas. So with XLOOKUP, it's a really simple process. We select the value, we select up our lookup range, right? So it's really easy. And then select where I want to return the values from. So I've got an employee ID. Let's say I want to determine what department they're from. Enter. Really easy. So it tells me employee ID 1005 relates to finance. It's correct. With VLOOKUP, this is what it looks like. So selecting the lookup value still, selecting the array. Now I can just select the entire columns if I want, just to make it easy. I can select the entire table. It doesn't really matter as long as my index number, my column index number, is within this range. I'm good. So I have to count. So 1005 was here in this column. So I have to jump. This is the first column, the second column, and I want my value in the third column. Right? So I don't have to use a range of B to E. I could just use B to D. As long as the column's within there, it's fine. And for the range lookup, you can leave this blank and it can work, but just to be safe, you can say you're looking for an exact match. Say false, and we've got the same result. So the difference isn't a whole lot different. So if you use the formula text function, we can actually compare really easily. So you can see those differences. Not a whole lot. We're still selecting the lookup value, except we don't have to count our columns, right? So in that sense, XLOOKUP makes that process a whole lot easier. Imagine you got 20 columns worth of data. It's not practical. One of the more common issues I've seen on older spreadsheets where people got really complex models is they've got this column number, let's say 20 or 15 or whatever, and by the time you look at what that column number actually is, or what that column is referencing, it's the wrong thing. So it's really easy to make a mistake if you're counting column numbers, especially if you imagine if you're adding or changing your table over time, you're adding columns, removing stuff. I mean, this is a hard-coded value in there, right? So the danger you have there is, if you insert it, like let's insert a column here. That did not change. That stayed at 3. This one did update. It's still got the right thing. So that's a big advantage for XLOOKUP, right? So imagine you're working in an office and you've got VLOOKUPs and you've got that hard-coded number in there. That is potentially a disaster because over time it can end up referencing the wrong column. So it's a really common mistake with VLOOKUP. Now, so XLOOKUP does do that really well. Now, another thing that VLOOKUP doesn't do well is it can't go from right to left. Like in this example, we grab the employee ID, we went from left, pull the value from the right, but we can't do the opposite. We can't go from right and go left. Like let's say, for example, I'm going to delete this, and let's say now we're looking for, let's say Alex Johnson. We want to know what department or what employee ID this person has, right? So what I'm going to do with XLOOKUP makes it really simple. We select this value, and again we can select, doesn't really matter as long as our arrays are the same size. Really simple. We've got that Alex Johnson, the employee ID 1003. With VLOOKUP I cannot do this. There's no way I can do this. I can't select Alex Johnson and in my table array I can't do this. What would I do? Right, -1. I can't do a negative. Right, I'm going to get an error. Right, it doesn't find it. Doesn't compute. I can't put that I want it from the first column because in VLOOKUP it's by default looking up in that first column, right? So it's going to expect that this search value, Alex Johnson, is in column B, which it's not, right? But there's no way I can tell VLOOKUP, I want you to look up for the value in here and extract the value from here. It can't go from right to left, right? So one of the most basic limitations of VLOOKUP. So that is a thing that XLOOKUP solves. It also solves for the fact that if your table moves over time, XLOOKUP will automatically update, VLOOKUP won't. So those are two serious limitations for sure. But now let's look at index and match. So this is something really common that users might use when they are looking for an alternative, where VLOOKUP fails, where it can't do this right to left. If you go left to right, VLOOKUP is fine. And what you could do is, if you're concerned about this column issue, what you could do is do a match function where you search for the column name, right? So in that case, then it's going to count. So there are workarounds to make VLOOKUP work. Not as elegant, not as nice as XLOOKUP, but there are ways to go around that. But index and match is one of your best bets for a more versatile lookup option. So in this case, it can accomplish going from right to left. In this case, we're doing the index function, and we're selecting the array. Think of this as being your return array in XLOOKUP. This is where you want the values to come from. So I want the employee ID. I'm going to select this entire range here, or just far enough that it works, right? And then for the row number, this is where I am going to use the match function to say, okay, look for this value within this range. And I want a match type, I want an exact match, so I'll set it to 0. The column number is 1 because in this index, I've only selected one column, so I can only put in one column, right? So it's going to look back at that index to say, okay, which column within that index do I want to pull the value from? It's always going to be 1 if I only select one column. Otherwise, I'll get an error. So if I do this, you see it works just the same, right? So we're selecting the column that we want the values, the lookup values, and then we're also selecting the column that we want to, we're looking up the values that we want to extract from, and then specifying the values that we want to do a lookup in. And we're still specifying our lookup values. So in that sense, it is pretty similar to XLOOKUP. You'll see it's a bit more complex because obviously I'm going to delete VLOOKUP for now, because as you can see, it's a bit more steps involved, right? We're still making those selections. The one difference you'll notice is at the beginning here. Here we're selecting column B, our return range, whereas in XLOOKUP it's at the very end. So the steps are a little bit, the sequence is a little bit different, but we're still, selecting our lookup value, selecting our lookup range. So there's a few more arguments to enter, but overall it's not really cumbersome, right? Now let's say if let's do the test again. Let's insert a column here, right? What happens here? We still have the same references because, again, we're not hard coding any column numbers in here. Index and match works just fine. So that brings me to the main reason why I don't use the main reason why I don't use XLOOKUP. Well, two reasons, I guess I should say. One, I think index and match does just as good a job as XLOOKUP. There may be a few more pieces into it, but it doesn't fix something that's really broken for me. I don't like the idea of changing the process of, as you can see here, and I've seen this with newer Excel functions as well, where the arguments are in a different order, so it's easy to make mistakes, especially if you've used something like index match a lot, where you're starting with index, you're starting with your first column where you're extracting from. In XLOOKUP, that's the last argument. So a minor issue, but the main reason why I don't is for backwards compatibility. So XLOOKUP is a new function. It works in Office 365, and it's apparently available in Office 2021. But if you're working on older versions of Excel, let's see, you've got Excel, 2013, 2010, 2003, you're not going to be able to rely on XLOOKUP. You're going to be having to use index and match. And the problem with that is, if you let's say you're at work, you create a great template, but it uses XLOOKUP, you send it to your boss or to a coworker. They're on an older version, they don't have Office 365, opens up, they get a bunch of name errors. And so they'd get a spreadsheet full of things that look like this. So if I type in, let's say, if I spell XLOOKUP with an A at the end, that's what they're going to see on their spreadsheet. They're going to see a bunch of name errors because on an older version of Excel, that function does not exist. XLOOKUP does not exist. So when I'm creating templates, or when I'm creating files, I always want to use the best old school function I can use, because there's nothing worse than sending something to a coworker, to your boss, whatever the case may be. They open it up and it's like, okay, why are there errors on my sheet, right? They're going to get frustrated. They're going to be like, why is this on there? And then you're going to have to go through the process and fix all those formulas that have XLOOKUP and go back to index and match, right? Whereas index and match, it's available in Office 365. It works on older versions, and so I just don't see a reason why I would use XLOOKUP. I just haven't seen that. If you think I'm wrong and if you find a reason, let me know. I mean, maybe it's a bit faster, maybe it computes a bit bigger, but I don't see any overwhelming reason to do that. Index and match, I think, works just fine. And I think the danger is if you rely too much on the newer functions in Excel, you may run into that situation where you have to go back and adjust it for older. You can't always assume that someone's going to use the latest version of Office, and that's really the biggest reason that I generally avoid new functions. I'll go over them in my videos to show you how they work, but that's the big reason I try not to get too reliant on them, because there's going to be situations, especially if you're working in Excel a lot, working for different companies of different sizes. They're not all going to be running Excel 365. You'll run into those who still have 2003, 2010. They still work fine. For things that are really new functions or new features like Power Query that's not available on older versions of Excel, well, you kind of know that going in, right? Someone knows that they can't open Power Query on Excel 2003. It doesn't exist, right? But when you're talking about functions that are lookups that are available on older versions of Excel, people are going to expect that functionality to still work. If you send it to an older a person who's not familiar with Excel, they might get frustrated thinking, okay, this sheet's full of errors and you need to fix them. It's not going to be an ideal situation. So that's the main reason why I would say XLOOKUP is a good function, but I wouldn't rely on it on a regular basis, especially if you're doing Excel for work. If you're doing Excel for your own personal use, then sure, go ahead, use XLOOKUP, whatever you want. But if you're in that situation where you may need to send the file at some point to another user, to another person, then you may be better off using something like index and match. As you can see, it's not a whole lot more difficult to use index and match. You're adding another function, but again, I don't see it as being a whole lot more complicated. XLOOKUP offers some nice to have features in the sense that it's a bit easier to use it, but it doesn't really introduce anything new or groundbreaking that makes that function a whole lot better than what's already in Excel. So that's just my 2 cents on XLOOKUP and why you'll never find it in any one of my templates or spreadsheets, just because I would not want to have it in a situation where if I have to make it available to users, then I'd have to reprogram it for it to work on older computers and go through that process. Because index and match, I think, is just as good as XLOOKUP. It does the same things. It addresses the shortcomings of VLOOKUP, and it's going to work in old and new versions of Excel. So that's my overview of XLOOKUP, VLOOKUP, index and match. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.